With a fine-tooth comb, we are going to be going through these top 10 nutritional concepts that frankly every man needs to not only be apprised of, but also apply to his daily nutrition to achieve peak physical performance, but also to be of sound mind and overall health and well-being. What I'm going to be doing is not only expounding upon each of these points, but I'm also going to be oscillating between that and actually showing you where the rubber meets the road. So I'm actually logged into my chronometer.com account right now. And as I said, I will be oscillating between these two to not only give you the theory, but show you how it's actually done, how to land the plane as it were, right? How to actually practice what is being preached here. And the first thing that needs to be preached here is the importance of prioritizing saturated and monounsaturated fat. And I know this flies in the face of the mainstream prevailing dietary dogma that both you and I have quite frankly been indoctrinated with. But that being said, we have to be cognizant of the fact that everything that touches your tongue, teeth, and lips, every food that has fatty acids is going to have a certain ratio of saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fat. And what we want to do for not just optimal endocrine function, but optimal overall health and well-being is prioritize the amount of saturated and monounsaturated with respect to polyunsaturated fat that we are consuming. And so good sources of the fats that you want to emphasize most greatly would be things like full fat dairy, for example, yogurt, cheese, milk. Assuming that you can digest and tolerate dairy effectively, these are really going to serve you well because of the favorable ratio of each of these fats therein. Another good source is frankly just meat in general, but most specifically ruminant meat because it is very low in polyunsaturated fats, somewhere on the order of 2%. Other good sources of saturated and monounsaturated fats include things like coconut oil, macadamia nuts, and beef tallow, although one disclaimer that I do want to issue is because this is such a prevailing recommendation, in particular in the animal-based community, the fact that ghee is not going to do you a service because as clarified butter, the clarification process that actually renders it results in a non-trivial amount, double-digit percentage-wise degree of oxysterols, and those are injurious to the endothelium of your blood vessels and by extension are actually directly atherogenic and quite frankly something that you don't want to be touching with a 10-foot pole. Let's check out my dietary log here for April 17th of 2024. You can see exactly what I'm eating and in exactly what quantities and the relative caloric contribution. You can see we've got basmati rice, whole milk, ground beef, whole eggs, some pomegranate juice, beef gelatin, and then Redmond's real salt. If you have an account on Chronometer, you can also follow suit with what I'm doing now, which is I'm just scrolling down to the lipids section. And what we can see is the total number of grams of fat that I'm consuming per day, in this case, 83.7. But you can also see the relative breakdown of that, the mono, the saturated, and the polyunsaturated fats. And if I were to hover over the saturated fat, for example, you can see the top three sources for me are going to be whole milk, beef, and eggs. Now, it goes without saying that if you don't happen to digest dairy effectively, then the amount of saturated fat that you derive from full fat dairy is going to be far south of what I'm deriving. And what I can actually show you is that this is largely genetically determined. So don't feel bad, for example, if you don't have the genetics that code for lactase persistence. If you've had your genome sequenced before, maybe you've used a service like 23andMe, you can actually request the raw genomic material and they'll send you a text document, which I'm actually going to open in just a second. And I will show you exactly what you can keyword search for to get a sense of your dairy digesting genetics. It's this file right here. And I'm going to copy and paste this code here that I have written down. And what the code is RS4988235. I'm not going to delve into the genomic relevance of this sequence, but basically it's a SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism, and it is the one with the greatest predictive potential for how well you digest dairy. So if I were to keyword search Control F this sequence here, and you could do this as well, by the way, if you look at the last column far to the right, you can see the AA allele. And 23andMe actually published some really interesting statistics here that I'd like to share with you in terms of one's ability to actually process lactose. I'm just going to zoom into this real quick because it's ethnically relevant. And what they did is they compared Europeans to Africans, East Asians, Latinos, and South Asians. And what you can see is that my AA result is represented by precisely 0% of the East Asian population. So don't feel bad if you aren't able to digest dairy properly. This is largely outside of your circle of concern, and as I said, is genetically predetermined. Now, step number 2 really dovetails with the first step. And what this is to minimize your intake of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And if you're familiar with my content, you've subscribed to my channel previously, you will know the famous 18-word sentence that I will continue to utter until I die literally on this hill. And it's that consuming more polyunsaturated fats than that found in nature will slowly oxidize your body and cause chronic disease. Chronic disease that, by the way, I used to have to contend with. So I had this rare condition called eosinophilic esophagitis. And as a quick tangential point, I'll just show on screen the before and after result of this, of finding out about this information and then actually applying it and healing my esophagus and just transforming myself in every way imaginable. Minimizing your polyunsaturated fatty acid intake to no more than 10% of your total fat intake is the precise metric that you want to aim for. And if you're logged into your Chronometer account, very simply, just take the decimal point of your total grams of fat, move it 1 point to the left, and just make sure that you're not consuming any more polyunsaturated fat per day than that number. So my 83.7 grams of total fat would become 8.37. And we can see here that I'm consuming about 6.8 grams of polyunsaturated fat. So that checks out. This is highly worthwhile and something that you should be checking for yourself to make sure that you are in the clear. PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, are really problematic for a number of reasons, but frankly, they can really wreak havoc on your endocrine system, your testosterone production. And they can actually do so by way of a number of mechanisms. One way that they facilitate this is by inducing undue oxidative stress to the Leydig cells of the testicles. And frankly, even if you were logged into Chronometer and you were to hover over polyunsaturated fats, let's just read the definition that they've offered us here, which is that they contain many poly double bonds in the chain. They are usually liquid at room temperature. Each double bond makes a polyunsaturated fat more susceptible to oxidation. And quite frankly, what they don't mention here is that the implications, the downstream ramifications of that one sentence alone, quite frankly, could probably only be measured on the Richter scale. And so keeping in mind the fact that they do have a preponderance of double bonds, they are more prone to oxidation. They do induce undue oxidative stress, stifling the function of your Leydig cells. Another thing that they do is they are hepatotoxic in excess. They're toxic to your liver, which is responsible for largely cholesterol synthesis. And that's a really important precursor in the steroidogenesis pathway. And I can actually pull up a picture of that just so that you can gain an appreciation of, at the molecular level, how similar cholesterol and testosterone are as four-membered rings. And what you see here is this pathway from cholesterol to pregnenolone to DHEA, androstenedione, testosterone, estradiol. You can see a number of different pathways here. You can see the pregnenolone pathway, which goes back to progesterone, and eventually leading to testosterone biosynthesis. But the problem is that if you are artificially lowering your cholesterol synthesis by way of, for example, excess PUFA consumption or even statins like Lipitor or Crestor, you're going to be putting a dampener in the end on your own endocrine function. And then, quite frankly, another mechanism that can result in compromised testosterone production is the fact that a lot of the sources of PUFAs, polyunsaturated fats, happen to be rich in phytosterols, which have also been shown to directly inhibit test production. Now, these phytosterols are found not least in the hateful eight: corn, canola, cottonseed, soybean, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, grapeseed. These are highly prone to oxidation, easily oxidizable, refined, bleached, and deodorized industrial oils that were literally designed to lubricate machinery and not mankind. And so if you are consuming processed packaged foods, the likes of which come in bags, boxes, cans, and containers within the depths and breadths of the various aisles that line your grocery store of choice, you need to be very cognizant and vet all of the ingredients of such, because you can really leave no stone unturned given how ubiquitous these hateful eight oils are. Step number 3 is focusing on the amount of dietary fat. So we don't want to just be getting the right ratios of fat, but we want to be making sure that we are consuming at least 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. And what I'm actually going to do right now is pull up a calculator on my laptop so that you can get a sense of how to actually run this calculation for yourself. Let's say you are a 170 pound male. All you're going to do is divide that by 2.2. And that is going to give you a very good approximation of your weight in kilograms, and by extension, the number of grams of fat that you want to be consuming per day. So in this case, 77 grams of fat. I'll take a personal example here and take my weight in pounds, 188. I'm going to divide that by 2.2, and that results in a daily target of 85 grams of fat. And you can see if I were to pull up my dietary log, I'm at 83.7. So I really wouldn't want to be going any lower than I am now, because that is going to compromise my endocrine function. Step number 4 is focusing on another macronutrient, which often doesn't get talked about in terms of optimizing endocrine function, especially in the ever increasing in popularity keto and carnivore communities who really espouse the benefits of low carb dieting. And unfortunately, what they do is they throw out the baby with the bathwater and they demonize all carbohydrates instead of taking a more nuanced approach, like we would with anything, like we would with protein, being cognizant of the leucine content, the amino acid profile, and the relative digestibility of different sources of such, just like we would with fat, and thinking about our ratios of each type. We really want to take a nuanced perspective with carbohydrates as well, and we want to realize that a paucity of such consumption is really going to suppress not only our thyroid function, but it's going to increase our cortisol, and that's antagonistic with testosterone production. So it's going to decrease our test, decrease our serotonin production, and in general, not allow us to achieve peak performance in activities that are very glycogen demanding. And so if you engage in high volume bodybuilding training, like I recommend and engage in myself, you're really going to want to shoot for, at bare minimum, 150 grams of carbohydrates per day. And again, I'm going to be oscillating back to my chronometer daily log here, because if we were to scroll up, you can see that in an isocaloric state, I'm getting north of 300 grams of carbohydrates per day. And that's going to help me train with very high volume and help me sleep and just recover in a superior fashion. Moving along now to step number 5, which really dovetails with step number 4, we want to be taking a more close look at the types of carbohydrates that we're consuming. We don't want to be throwing out the baby with the bathwater and demonizing all carbohydrates, but rather we want to make the distinction that starch is going to be superior to sugar, especially in the context of optimal performance, wherein muscle glycogen replenishment is of paramount importance. What we need to recognize is that neither fructose nor galactose are capable of replenishing muscle glycogen, but rather merely liver glycogen, which actually has downstream metabolic ramifications that can be masked, albeit by a great degree of exercise, but is not going to be optimal for most people. So fructose and galactose cannot replenish muscle glycogen in the way that glucose is able to. And so the upper end that I would advise for combined fructose and galactose intake is 100 grams per day. And you have to be very careful when using a database like Chronometer. I'll show you the exact nuance here when assessing whether or not you're getting in excess of 100 grams of combined sugars. Because if I were to scroll down to galactose, it's saying that I'm getting 0 grams of galactose per day. So you think to yourself, well, that's well and good because I'm only getting 17 grams of fructose per day, so I'm certainly in the clear. But the truth is that when lactose gets digested, it gets digested into 50% glucose and 50% galactose. And so what you have to do is take this number here, the total grams of lactose that you are directly consuming, to calculate how much metabolized galactose that is actually giving rise to. And so if we were to do that, I'm getting about 26 grams of galactose per day due to my lactose metabolism. The same is also true of sucrose. You can see I'm only getting 0.6 grams, a negligible amount of sucrose per day. But if you're getting 50, 60, 70 grams, whatever the amount is, you need to divide that by 2 to figure out how much additional fructose you are giving rise to, because sucrose is going to break down into 50% fructose and 50% glucose. And if you're consuming, God forbid, high fructose corn syrup, that's going to have closer to, I believe, 55% fructose and 45% glucose after being metabolized. So at the end of the day, here's the calculation that you really want to do. You want to take, and this is for Chronometer specifically, take this number here that I'm trying to highlight. Take this number here that I'm hovering around, the grams of fructose, add that to 50% of this number here, lactose, and add that to 50% of this number here, sucrose. So we can do that exact calculation just to give you a very practical example of how we would do that. So I'm going to be taking, in this case, 17, and I'm going to add that to, I'm going to add parentheses here, 52.3 divided by 2, end parenthesis, added to 0.6 divided by 2. That equals 43.45. And you just want to make sure that that summation, whatever that is for you, is less than 100. Now moving along to principle number 6, which is that you want to be getting enough protein, but that the 1 gram per pound of body weight is quite frankly overkill and merely padding the pockets of supplement companies. The truth is that I don't want you to be spending undue, unnecessary money on whey protein supplements. I'd rather you dial that back, spend less money on supplements, and allocate those funds towards whole foods, which are going to offer a plethora of other benefits, vitamins, minerals, and satiety, which is going to help you stick to your nutrition plan. I'd rather you be spending less money on supplements and get less overall protein, as long as you're meeting the threshold that I'm about to communicate, than relying more greatly on supplements just to get to that 1 gram per pound of body weight. So the calculation that you're going to want to do here is to take your weight in pounds. So in my case, 188, you're going to divide that by 2.2, which is going to give you the approximate weight in kilograms. And then you can multiply that by 1.5. So the bottom line is that as long as you're getting 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of total body weight, then you're going to be in the clear. Now, the caveat here is that this is assuming that the majority of your protein is animal-based. If it's not, you're going to want to be consuming closer to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So we can redo that calculation here just to give you an example of what that entails. So if I take my weight divided by 2.2, and then I'm going to multiply that by 2, the range here is going to be the previously calculated 128 grams of protein, which is 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, to 171 or so grams of protein, which is using 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. What I'm going to do now is pull up my chronometer database. We're going to scroll down to the number of grams of protein that I'm getting per day. And you can see that this value is within that range that we just calculated. And you can also see the relative contribution of protein from each of the things that I'm eating. North of 80% of my protein is animal derived here. And so we can see that I am well within the range that we calculated. Principle number 7 is really just to prioritize animal derived proteins. And I'm going to pull up a graphic on screen now, which is going to communicate the importance of digestible, indispensable amino acid score. And if we zoom in here, what you can see is in descending order of bioavailability, the relative scores of each of these sources of protein. And you can see full fat dairy really reigning supreme at the top, followed by eggs, beef, chicken breast. And then of course, south of that, we're going to be seeing a lot of our plant-based proteins, which you really do not want to have constitute the majority of your diet because, for example, their amino acid profile is just vastly inferior. They have less leucine and overall are going to be inferior at stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Principle number 8 is born out of the recognition that we don't want to merely be prioritizing foods with a preponderance of micronutrients, but that we want to be avoiding foods with a preponderance of anti-nutrients. So I'm going to pull up a graphic on screen here, which is going to communicate a number of different types of these anti-nutrients, tannins and phytates, not least of which, but also myriad digestive enzyme inhibitors by way of protease inhibitors, lipase inhibitors, and amylase inhibitors, which inhibit the enzymes that digest your dietary protein, fat, and carbohydrates, respectively. But you can also see things such as lectins, saponins, and oxalates. These are largely found in plant-based foods, specifically the most heavily defended aspect of a plant. Examples include beans, seeds, nuts, and legumes, but they can also be found to a much lesser extent in animal-based products. Avidin found in egg whites is a really good example, and unfortunately in some people can lead to a biotin deficiency, but it can really be circumnavigated by lightly cooking your eggs. You don't want to be oxidizing the cholesterol in the yolk, so you definitely don't want to overdo it. But what I like to do is throw mine in an Instant Pot for 6 minutes on low pressure. And that results, in my case, in a really perfectly cooked hard-boiled egg. Where these anti-nutrients really rear their ugly head is in the context of a mixed meal. So when you're eating things that are incredibly micronutrient dense, things like eggs, things like beef, like full-fat dairy, the problem is that these anti-nutrients are really going to put a dampener on how much of that nutrition is actually bioavailable. So just like a business that has a certain amount of overhead expenses, you need to factor that in when calculating your net profit. We don't care so much about gross revenue as we do the amount that we're actually taking home. Principle number 9 is a very nuanced look at fiber. So people in the so-called evidence-based community will talk about the importance of fiber and how, quite frankly, you cannot get enough. But what I would like to do is actually just offer an analogy which I hope will drive home the point that fiber is merely conditionally beneficial, just like a raincoat. So that's the analogy that I want to offer, is that soluble fiber can be likened to a raincoat. What we could appreciate is that in an environment that does have a lot of rain, people wearing raincoats are probably better off, right? Because they are inoculated from the rain that would otherwise make them wet and maybe put them ostensibly in a bad mood. But the problem is that if we don't actually understand how that's happening, if we don't understand that the only reason that the raincoat is conferring protection and improving these people's lives is because of the environment, because it's shielding them from the raindrops, then unfortunately our actions will be ill-informed. And what I mean by that is that a lot of these evidence-based scientists really pedestalize human outcome data. And what they do is they fail to appreciate the importance of mechanisms, because if you don't understand the role of fiber and how that's actually conditionally beneficial, then what you do is, as a blanket statement and recommendation, you just universally offer people the recommendation of consuming more fiber. But just like a raincoat, for somebody that's living in the Sahara Desert, for example, it doesn't exactly behoove them, does it? And in fact, could be a net negative. And so where soluble fiber, which must be contrasted with insoluble fiber, which passes through the digestive tract unchanged, what it does is it can attract different substances that inhibit their relative absorption, things that are dangerous like advanced glycation end products and oxysterols, which is why in the context of a processed diet, like the standard American diet, which is largely based on the consumption of heat-treated processed foods that come in bags, boxes, cans, and containers, these frankenfoods, which are constituting an increasing percentage of one's diet. Now, for a more in-depth look at the nuances of fiber, and this is a very, very important point, what I'd like you to do is pull up a web browser and go to alphaactualization.com, and you can read there a further elaboration of each of the points of this video. And so what I'm going to do right now is just scroll down to the article called Nutrition Guidelines for Optimal Health and Performance, and you can scroll down to step number 9 and read that for yourself. And frankly, I would recommend bookmarking this website as well, because every Friday night at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, there's going to be another piece of the puzzle, as it were, that's going to help you level up as a man in this life and navigate the modern world more effectively. Now, bringing it home now with principle number 10, we're talking about meal frequency, because unfortunately in the bodybuilding and fitness community, increased meal frequency to the effect of 4, 5, 6 meals per day to have evenly divided doses of protein is often recommended. And I would submit that that is in many ways antithetical to optimal metabolic health. And what I'd like to do is just share with you the strategy that I personally employ, which is I take my daily food allotment here and I just cut it in half, and I just have 2 divided meals per day, both of which I cook in an Instant Pot. One will be in the morning, maybe 7, 8 o'clock, and then one will be in the evening, say around 5 or 6 o'clock. And what I find this does is it liberates the time in between. And so what I've noticed is that a lot of people who have conventional 9-to-5s, unfortunately, there are a lot of honeypots that you can get stuck at there, right? When you see what your coworkers are eating, what your coworkers' spouses are packing them to eat for lunch, what they themselves are packing for lunch. This is going to be a very unfavorable environment for you to be amidst. And what I found is that it's just better to deal with nutrition in a controlled environment. When you wake up in the morning, you're at home. Before bedtime, you're going to be at home. And what I find is that all of the temptations ostensibly are outside of your home. And if you can curate a really good environment at home with whole, minimally processed foods procured at the periphery of your grocery store of choice, then what you can do is have a more dialed in environment and just fast when you're outside of your home. And the other benefits is frankly just saving you time. You don't have to pack a lunch. You don't have unnecessary dishes. You don't have to worry about your dental hygiene in the middle of the day. You don't have to pack a toothbrush or floss to bring with you to work. And even if you're not working, let's just say that you are out and about, what this allows you to do is just get more juice out of the squeeze of whatever you happen to be doing throughout your day without being food focused. Now, the truth is that depending on the meal frequency that you've been consuming and adopting up until this point in time, this may be a bit of a transition. So if you're used to having a lunch, your body is sending those cues during that time of the day. This may be an adaptation where it may take a few days, a week or two, to get to the point where you're not actually hungry during the day. And what you'll notice is that you'll just have increased mental focus and overall more stable energy levels. There's a number of different ways that you could engage in a fasting protocol as well. You've got the traditional 24, the 16, and 8. But what I like to do is just have 2 evenly divided, relatively even spaced meals per day. And what I find is that that just happens to offer me the best balance of satiety, of getting 2 equal doses of protein. So I'm stimulating muscle protein synthesis. I'm getting a couple doses of carbohydrates, 1 post-workout, 1 at bedtime. It allows me to be satiated throughout the day because I'm not eating 3, 4, 5 times per day. Now, depending on your propensity to, for example, consume too many or too few calories relative to the amount that would maintain your body weight, a good general recommendation is 1 to 3 meals. 3 meals if you're struggling to maintain or gain weight, 2 meals if you are at maintenance calories, and then 1 meal if you are struggling to lose weight. But the general theme here is 1 to 3 meals per day without snacking in between. And that wraps up the top 10 principles that constitute optimized nutrition. So what I'd like you to do is just go through each of those 10 points and cross-reference with Chronometer, just like I showed you here, so that you can see whether or not you're checking those boxes. And if you're not, you just have to ask yourself, okay, how do I need to reconfigure my daily meal plan so that I'm actually satisfying all of those 10 points? The goal here is not for you to precisely emulate the exact foods that I'm eating, but rather to really internalize the importance of these principles and find a diet that's optimal for you. Thank you so much for checking out this video today. I'm going to show you just real quickly a picture of the personal transformation that I underwent after coming into contact with this information in 2015. This knowledge has truly revolutionized my life in every way imaginable, and I hope the same for you. Let me know if you have any questions about this. I know it's a lot of information, potential overload, and if you have any clarifying questions, comments, or concerns, I want to know. I love you very much. And until next time, my friend, find your freedom.